out nicely. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us for HFC. Just by way of background, in addition to my work as an elder law attorney, I'm also on the HFC advisory board, and it's great with many other of my colleagues, and it's great to be here today. So, what you are, in case you're just make sure you're in the right room. This is the financial planning and legal preparedness breakout, and so I don't know if there is a way that I don't know if there is a way to interact, but if there is, feel free to if there's a chat bar. I'm not sure, but if there is, feel free, and I'll try to be interactive at times. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint with you. And again, for those of you, many of we had a few more people log in. My name's Jerry Rothkopf. I'm managing attorney of Rothkopf Law Group. I'm an elder law attorney based in the Philadelphia region. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go share my screen. Hopefully it works. And I'm going to spend some time talking to you about legal and financial planning issues. And hopefully this would be helpful to you to talk about if you are a caregiver or if you are an individual who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia or are caring for a loved one with such. Hopefully this will be helpful to you. And again, this is really geared to understanding about what documents should be in place, as well as what to consider. And when I sit down with a family or someone, and I'm counseling a family who was maybe just diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's or related dementia, and I review these 4 questions with them because this is what's important, and this is what most people are concerned about, and we'll break that down over the next 45 minutes or so. First item is, how can I protect my assets and myself if I become disabled? And if I need care, how can I receive quality care? And where is the best place for care? And some of that's also dependent on several different issues. It could be family dynamics. Most people, if they had their druthers, and I'm sure you will agree, would want to remain home. Well, that sounds great, but do you have caregivers? Some people do not have close relatives near them, or maybe they outlived most of their family and friends, or maybe you can't afford home care and you need to rely on state Medicaid benefits, particular to your state, to receive care outside your home. So it's important to consider, where can I get quality care if it's necessary? How can I make important decisions regarding financial and health care if I am unable to do so? In other words, due to significant cognitive impairment, I am incapacitated at some point in the future. And who's going to make those important decisions for me as my financial or healthcare surrogate? And the last one is a very good question that many people, of course, don't want to necessarily think about, but it's important to discuss with your family. Do I want my life extended by life support, even though a medical event has left me in critical condition without any hope of significant recovery? And so in other words, what is quality of life to you? Quality of life to me is different than quality of life for you, I am sure. So, no one should dictate what you consider quality of life. And it's important for you to allow your family to understand what quality of life means to you personally. So we'll break that down. And again, some of this I know is going to be basic for some of you, and some of you already have met with an attorney or you have documents already in place, and I get that. But I want to talk more in general terms about what basic documents you have, and some of this understands that some of the planning is state specific, and some states have specific forms. I know, for example, I don't practice in New York State, although I'm in New York State at the moment. New York State has a specific dual financial power of attorney form that most attorneys utilize. So some of what I'm explaining to you is state specific. And if you, just an important disclaimer, So if you want to get planning to plan, it's important to meet with someone who is practices in your state. I get calls from people all over the country, or I have people near me, my hometown of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they say, Jerry, can you assist with my mom in California? No, because I'm not licensed by the state of California to practice law. You must go someone in your particular state. So when we look at when we consider estate planning documents, most people will say, when I ask them, what is the most important document you can have? And most people say, well, a last will and testament. And that's the typical answer. A will is important. But when we are dealing with Alzheimer's and related dementia, a will is only effective naturally at death, meaning a will is important, but the will is not effective until the individual passes. So during your lifetime, that is when you want to look at getting your documents in place. So for most people, the most important document, legal document at least, you can have in place is a durable financial and healthcare power of attorney. Those are documents for living. And we'll talk a little more about each of those documents. A living will or advance directive about, what's quality of life for you, about end of life issues, very important. A living trust or irrevocable trust can be important, specifically a living trust, especially with states that have high probate fee costs like California or Florida. Irrevocable trust typically is an asset protection device to protect assets in case long-term care is needed, and we'll touch upon that in a little bit. And lastly, it is an acronym. It's POST, Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And that's a relatively new phenomenon, and it's not effective in every state. Pennsylvania and New Jersey, in other words, the states in which I practice elder law, recognize POST, Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It is a physician's order. It's a conversation between your treating physician and yourself in which both you and your doctor sign the document about what type of care you want to have at end of life. And it's an order. That's why it's Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And it runs parallel with your advance directive or living will. And we'll touch upon that in a little while as well. So from a durable power of attorney perspective, it's important to understand these are not just forms. Now, that's not to say you cannot have a valid quality document done online. Many documents online are just fine. It doesn't have to be that fancy. It just needs to conform to your state law. And durable powers of attorney are state specific. Some have certain forms that others do not have. For example, Pennsylvania has a specific disclaimer language that's required for the document to be effective that the state of New Jersey does not have, for example. So they are not just forms. And there's two general types of durable. And when I talk about durable powers of attorney, I'm referring to durable financial powers of attorney specifically. They can be effective immediately, or sometimes the term is used, they spring or springing power of attorney. What that means is that they spring to life if an individual is disabled. They become effective. I typically recommend the document be effective immediately because usually you need the document in a crisis. Mom is now hospitalized. She can't make decisions for herself, and we need to utilize a document. Well, if it's springing, you have to actually prove that your mother is disabled. In other words, incapacitated, and you need doctor's reports, and and that could take a while to obtain. So, generally, it's effective immediately. The document, if it's effective immediately, is presumed to be durable. That means that it continues in effect even if disability were to occur. And as I mentioned, there's two types. There's financial, which is banking. It's accessing retirement accounts. It just to make sure all bills are paid. And then there's healthcare, which is, I think, self-explanatory, but both are important. Both documents terminate upon death. I mentioned a will is only effective if you name an executor. Important to do so. But executor only has authority at death. Up until death, it's your agent named under your durable financial or healthcare power of attorney. And generally, if you have an effective durable financial and healthcare power of attorney, it avoids guardianship. So you would not need an action in the county in which your loved one resides and have a judge declare your loved one incapacitated, which no one wants to do. And also, the durable and financial powers of attorney are what's called an exception to HIPAA, the healthcare privacy laws that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So if you have a healthcare power of attorney on file, you have authority under HIPAA to release to receive information for your loved one. And a living will and advance directive. Also, not just a form, you need both. A living will, think of it as kind of a healthcare power of attorney is kind of an umbrella. A living will takes effect only upon in end of life circumstances. But the healthcare POA is configured, it's like an umbrella insurance policy, and then a living will takes effect at end of life. And again, you appoint your agent to speak for you, and it's, as I said, it has limited applicability end of life. An advance directive is important. It is very important. However, it's even more important to have a conversation with your loved ones, as I mentioned earlier, about how you define, as I said before, quality of life. So to have those written words are important, but they're just words, and it's just a piece of paper. You need to bring that to life to explain to your loved ones what that means to you and what you would want when someone has to make these very important healthcare decisions that they're very uncomfortable making. And maybe they would have some comfort in the fact that you gave that individual, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your child, whether it's a grandchild, ammunition, and gave them important information that would help them be comfortable in their decision to act on your behalf at end of life, in end of life circumstances. Many people come to elder law attorneys, inclusive of myself, in a crisis situation. And meaning that their loved one now maybe is being discharged from a nursing home. But they were diagnosed with Alzheimer's 8 years earlier. But now, unfortunately, they fell and broke a hip. And now they need placement, and nothing has been planned. No power. There may not be a financial or healthcare power of attorney in place. They do not have long-term care insurance. They haven't investigated what the housing options are. They haven't investigated what the cost structure looks like. So it's very important to pre-plan. But because human nature is the way it is, that sometimes people don't plan, and we get that quite often. But percentage-wise, over 43% of those age 65 or older at some point will enter a nursing home. Maybe not on a permanent basis, could be rehabilitation, but statistically 43% of those over age 65 will at some point enter a nursing home. And the average nursing home cost is it's based upon your area, is now over $100,000. In some metropolitan areas, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, you're talking cost over $150,000 a year. So it depends where, but in large metro areas, you're talking easily maybe close to $500 a day, significant dollars out of pocket. And so it's important to pre-plan. What are the options? If someone has Alzheimer's, they may need an assisted living memory care community, which is not nursing home, and those costs can vary between, say, $8,000 to $12,000 per month. Still significant cost. And so, how is that going to be covered? What about Medicaid eligibility and different Medicaid programs in your individual state? It's important to understand what that looks like. Also, by having the correct legal documents in place, you help to avoid a crisis as well. And I talked briefly about a guardianship. A guardianship is a legal proceeding in which you would have to have a judge in the county in which your loved one resides declare your loved one incapacitated. You want to avoid a guardianship at all costs. And so it's by having the financial and healthcare powers of attorney in place, in many cases you would have the you would avoid a guardianship. Not always. There are situations where families, for whatever reason, not see eye to eye, and there is some litigation because someone stole money or was accused of stealing, or maybe a family member does not believe that the agent named in the power of attorney is acting in the incapacitated person's best interest. So a guardianship may be needed, or guardianship could be brought to terminate an existing authority of an agent under a power of attorney. But generally, a properly drafted, durable financial and healthcare powers of attorney avoid a guardianship. As I also mentioned before, it's important to investigate the housing options out there. And it's very state specific. For example, what does a home care agency cost? What does assisted living cost? What does assisted living memory care cost? What options are out there to bring care in the home? How about adult medical daycare? How about life programs, which gives a day center, which is typically a Medicaid sponsored program that many states offer? So do states have, does your particular state, for example, have Medicaid home care programs called, typically it's referred to as home and community-based services, HCBS? Is that out there in your area? What are the eligibility rules? If you are a veteran, what VA benefits are out there to assist you? And I'll touch upon VA benefits in a bit. So it's important to investigate those housing options. And because we're in a post-COVID world, it's important to understand costs have skyrocketed. What used to, for a quality home care agency out there today, what used to be maybe $22 to $25 an hour for a caregiver through a quality home care agency, now in many cases is $35 to $40 an hour. What used to be, if you can afford a live-in, what used to be between $225 and $275 an hour a day is probably closer to $400 a day. So due to the cost related to COVID and everything that surrounds it, costs have skyrocketed. And it's important for you to be aware of that cost structure. And also, for many people, they want to protect their family. They want to protect their spouse of 50 plus years. They want to protect the child, especially if they have a child with a special need, an autistic child, a child with cerebral palsy, etc. And it's important to pre-plan to protect a child with a disability. It's important to pre-plan to protect a healthy spouse, especially if there's a significant age difference between spouses. We work with many couples where we have one spouse in his or her mid-80s and the other spouse is in their 60s. Sometimes it could be a second marriage. And so it's important to look at the situation, the family dynamics, to see what really needs to be done. Because in many cases, the individual who's diagnosed with some dementia is not as concerned about themselves. In many cases, they're more concerned about the impact of the family. And I'm sure you heard today that Alzheimer's doesn't just affect the individual diagnosed with the disease. It affects the entire family, and it has a profound impact on the entire family. So it's important not just as other panels have talked about already. It's important not just for the caregiver to get services for their loved one. It's also important for the caregiver to take care of themselves as well. So when we talk about long-term care financing, and we can spend hours talking about this, but thankfully I will not this afternoon. There's typically 5 different ways long-term care is covered, some of which I'm sure you're familiar with. Um, Private pay, well, I talked about those expenses associated with private pay. The majority of the individuals we work with cannot afford to pay in for their lifetime because they have limited funds, or maybe they need to protect other family members. So the cost, whether it's assisted living, home care, um, or nursing home care. So, but private pay is important, and we'll talk more about why private pay can buy access in some cases to quality care. If you're fortunate enough, long-term care insurance is the way to go. But it's expensive, and for a variety of reasons, um, people don't qualify because maybe they were diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia. Maybe it's just that they have other healthcare related issues, diabetes and such, where they don't qualify for long-term care insurance. And it's expensive. Um, my wife, after after driving herself crazy for about 3 or 4 months, was finally approved for long-term care insurance. So we had a big celebration for her. So she was very excited. That happened a couple weeks ago. That was a big moment in our lives. And but and it there one long-term care insurance does not fit all. There are all different types of long-term care insurance today, much different than it was 15 or 20 years ago. So if you're in the market for long-term care insurance, by all means, please speak with someone who is familiar with policy. Speak with an insurance professional who deals in long-term care insurance, because there's the standard, typical, traditional long-term care policies, but now there's lots of other insurance policies that are tied to life insurance, for example. And there is a long-term care rider. For example, they don't want to continue to pay several $1,000s of premiums every year, and instead that they want they want some return of that. Well, the good news there, of course, is what? If you're paying premiums for 25, 30 years and you never file a claim, God bless you, you're healthy. That's not a bad thing. But some people say, well, I just paid over $100,000 worth of premiums, and I got nothing to show for it. Well, that's, in some cases, that's a good thing, huh? Don't you think? But there are other policies where you can pay $100,000 and you get the premiums back. That's more tied to a life insurance policy, possibly a death benefit. So I'm not an expert on long-term care insurance. I do not sell long-term care insurance, but meet with someone who is an expert and can steer you in the right direction. Medicare. If you learn nothing else from our minutes together this afternoon on National Caregiver Day, I hope you learn this. Do not rely on Medicare to cover your long-term care needs. Um, Medicare is underutilized in many cases to cover home care. Medicare can cover home care if you meet the definition of skilled care, which is beyond the scope of our presentation today. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but there are specific requirements for Medicare to cover home care. It's underutilized, and sometimes your doctor should be your best friend who can say you need skilled care. But in a long-term care setting, meaning assisted living and nursing home, Medicare covers zero for assisted living and will only cover a small piece of nursing home care, which is the rehabilitation part, or some people refer to it as subacute. And you're from the hospital and you're discharged and you've been there for a 3-night stay, Medicare, and then you go to a rehabilitation part of a nursing home, Medicare can cover up to 100 days. 100 days is a maximum. It is not a guarantee. Most people do not, emphasis, do not receive 100 days. So bottom line, a little over 90 days maximum coverage in a nursing home setting. What does that mean? Do not rely on Medicare to cover your long-term care costs. Many people are under the misconception that Medicare will cover long-term care. Medicare was never designed to cover long-term. Medicare was established the same time in 1965 when President Johnson signed the Medicare law into effect. But for over, what's that, over 70 years now, I guess, 60 years now, I guess, bordering 60 years, that Medicare only covers skilled care. It does not cover the C word, and that's not cancer, by the way, in case you're wondering. Custodial care. Medicare does not cover custodial care, which, if you think about it, that's really what individuals with Alzheimer's and related dementia need. They don't need skilled care. They need a protective, supervised setting, some cueing, someone to assist with bathing, dressing, sometimes continence issues, hygiene. And for that, there is no Medicare coverage. So there's much more to it, but don't rely on Medicare. Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid are much different programs. Many people confuse them, though. Medicare is, in essence, an entitlement program. You're age 65 and you paid into the system, or you're blind or disabled prior to age 65, you're entitled to Medicare. It's universal health insurance for retirees and those with disabilities. Medicaid's different. Medicaid is not an entitlement program. Medicaid is based upon financial need. But I want to be clear and I want to emphasize this. Medicaid is a state program. It's very important for that. That means it's state run. So it's very important for you to understand what your state rules are. What your state rules are. The feds give the states money to their Medicaid program, and you have to each state has to meet some federal requirements. But each state can also, to a certain extent, under what's called waivers. Each state can apply to CMS for a waiver. Each state's waiver programs are different. So what I can do in the Philadelphia, in Cherry Hill, which is in New Jersey, it's different. So even though they may be 10 miles away from one another, they are different programs, and we have to advise our clients differently in each state. So all 50 states run their own Medicaid programs and have their own, and it's very important to know what the programs are in your individual state, because they're different. Some state programs are more generous than others. Some state programs have better benefits for home and community-based services. Some state programs cover assisted living. Some state programs don't. Again, I'm using Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where I practice, as an example. There is no Medicaid coverage for assisted living in Pennsylvania, but in New Jersey, there is. So sometimes if we have a client in Pennsylvania, and the client is running low on funds and needs assisted living memory care due to advanced Alzheimer's, but yet they don't have the funds to pay for it, otherwise they'll be institutionalized in a nursing home setting, because Medicaid can cover that, we will consider assisting our clients to move from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. And the other item is that sometimes is underutilized. First of all, it doesn't apply for obvious reasons, because you're not a veteran or a spouse or widower of a veteran. But VA benefits can be very valuable for those who can access those programs. And there's a ton of different veterans benefits programs that, again, is beyond the scope of today's presentation. But there are VA benefits that can cover housing. There are VA benefits that can cover medical benefits, prescription drug coverage, and there are VA benefits that's a pension. And if you need care and you're a veteran who served during a time of war, when I say a time of war, typically it's for our clients, it's less and less, of course, due to aging population, World War II, but more often than not, now we have Korean War and the Vietnam War, And if you serve during a time of war, a congressionally recognized time of war, and you're paying for home care, assisted living, nursing home care, you potentially can receive a benefit, tax-free benefit by the Veterans Administration to assist in paying for care, and that it typically you'll hear the program referred to as um, aid and attendance, or A&A, and that's a federal program, so it's same rules apply across the board in all 50 states, and so it's a valuable benefit. But it's important to understand, when I say it's important to understand these financing, because the in our country, um, that we do not have universal long-term care insurance. You know, every man and woman for him or herself, and it's important to understand how you and depending upon where you're living, what state you're living in, what type of care you need, what setting you're receiving that care. That's what dictates what is affordable or what benefits you can receive. Our system doesn't make sense, and it's important. Basically, what we're dealing with here is basically we're based our long-term care financing system is really based upon 1965 law, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and now we keep putting band-aids on top of it. And can we use improvement? Absolutely, we can use improvement on the of the system. But one day we'll probably have some form of long-term care insurance. We're probably one of we are pretty much the only westernized country without some form of long-term care insurance for our older citizens. We are not Western Europe for a variety of reasons, and we're not even Canada for that matter. So when we look at the care cost, private pay is very important. Why is private pay so important? Private pay is so important because it's key money. It's key to admission to the community, and for many of our clients, they have to pay privately at least for a period of time. It's when I use key money, that's a figurative term, but literally it opens the door. Money talks, and that's just the world we live in. Long-term care is big business, but of course, you risk depleting your life savings, especially if you have other loved ones to protect. In many cases, you would spend down funds and qualify for Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is not a taboo word. Due to the high cost of care for many of our middle-class clients, Medicaid, in many cases, is nothing more than long-term care insurance. And in fact, in many cases, that the what happened is that when the Medicaid law, specifically related to the financial eligibility, was revised in the early 90s, in many cases, Medicaid became a middle-class program where it allowed middle-class individuals to qualify for Medicaid because especially if there is a healthy spouse. And also private pay, there are many ways to avoid depletion of assets and protect assets. And there are ways, use legal methods. There are gifting limitations under what's called the Medicaid 5-year look back, but there are many exceptions. There's ways to protect the home. There's ways to protect the fund of trust for a child with a disability. So there's ways to protect the home, especially if a child is living in the home. Again, I want to emphasize many of these regulations and rules are specifically based upon the state in which you reside. And I urge you, if this is a concern of yours, meet with someone in the know, an elder law attorney in your state who can guide you accordingly. Long-term care insurance, good if you got assets to protect. Typically, early mid-50s is a good time to start doing your homework. Due to what's called a Medicaid 5-year look back, I would suggest if you're going to purchase long-term care insurance, look to purchase at least 5 years of long-term care. And you want policies that are pretty comprehensive, that covers home care, that covers ALF. ALF is assisted living facility. So you want policies that cover assisted living facilities, and also policies that cover nursing home. As I mentioned before, there are many different types of policies, but you don't necessarily have to insure dollar for dollar. You may want to consider what your retirement income is going to look like. If you're in your middle 50s now and you're a school teacher, well, in most states, you're going to get a decent pension if you've been a school teacher for a couple decades plus. A government employee, well, you're probably going to get a pension. Or do you work for Amtrak? Well, you're probably going to get a pension. Most people in the private sector do not have traditional pensions these days. So if you want to factor in, your income might be $5,000 with Social Security and retirement, fixed income a month I'm talking about. Do you necessarily need to insure dollar for dollar? Especially if you and your spouse now are both school teachers. Well, your retirement fixed income is not going to be too shabby. If you're going to look to purchase a policy, you generally want an inflation rider, because what a dollar is worth today, 30 years from now, is not going to be that same dollar is now has a purchase power of now 30 cents. So you want to make sure that your coverage keeps up with inflation. And if you're lucky enough to self-insure where money is not an issue, God bless you for that. So some people, enough is enough, and they don't necessarily need to purchase insurance because either they sold the business and did well for themselves, or received a nice inheritance, whatever it may be. So of course, if you're lucky enough to self-insure, then good for you. We don't work with most people we work with do not have the ability to self-insure. So it's important to plan, and insurance should be looked into for those who qualify and those who find it affordable. Medicare, as I mentioned earlier, only covers skilled nursing care, and there's limited coverage for in-home care, and it does not cover assisted living. There are specific requirements for home care. You must be quote-unquote homebound. You need a 3-day hospital stay and then admission to a nursing home within 30 days. Now, some of these rules have, during the past 3 years, have been waived due to some COVID exemptions, which are going to expire as of May 11th. Which, when I say expire, I mean the public health emergency will expire. And that's also important when I talk about Medicaid a little further in a bit. The care must be skilled care. And in a nursing home setting, as I mentioned, there is 100 days of coverage with 20 days paid in full. And then the next 21 through 100 days, the next 80 days, currently there's a $200 copay. And I mentioned default long-term care insurance, because of the cost of care. It also could be used in conjunction with long-term care insurance, but there are common rules. You may have a long-term care insurance policy that only covers $100 a day, and if you're in a nursing home, the cost is $15,000 a month. So you're only getting $3,000 a day of covered, $3,000 a month, I should say, of long-term care insurance, and you can have, and Medicaid can wrap around that. And again, state specific, it can cover assisted living, it can cover home care, nursing home, depending on your state. And there's many misconceptions, as I alluded to earlier. You got the 60-day look back. The rules can be quite complicated. However, just because you haven't planned 5 years in a row, there's still some planning opportunities, even if you are already in an assisted living facility or nursing home. And there are many exceptions to the transfer rules. When someone comes to me, my job is to educate them as to what the rules are, and look at the facts, at what their family dynamics are, and most importantly, what are they looking to accomplish? What are their goals? I can tell them. I'm not here to dictate what they should do. I want to effectuate their wishes. Now, some people say, I want to protect every penny I have. Okay, well, I want to talk to you. There's a way to do that, but first things first. And the first thing I want to do is to ensure that you get the best care. I don't want to protect every penny you have. And with knowing that I can do so, that also puts you in jeopardy of not receiving the best care. I want you to receive the best care. So let's get the care in place, and then we'll figure out how to pay for it without going broke. And so that's really what we try to assist our clients with. And from a VA perspective, there's two different types of benefits. You have a service-connected disability and non-service connected disability. So for service-connected disability, in some cases, the care can be free in a state nursing home or a federal VA nursing home. In other words, someone who's 100% service connected. Non-service connected, I mean, in other words, they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and related dementia, but that had nothing to do, their diagnosis had nothing to do with their time of service. So they can receive benefits, but in many cases, there's a financial test to receive benefits. You can receive some veterans benefits, home care at home or in a residential facility, depending upon service connected or non-service connected. And then I mentioned the uses of what's called aid and attendance benefits, as I mentioned before, which can be used to assist in paying for home care. It can be used for adult medical daycare, which is very important because it not only provides a proper socialization for the individual themselves, but it also gives the caregiver or a spouse a respite and break during the day. So, it can also cover assisted living. The benefits are basically $1,000 to $2,000 a month, tax-free income. The asset limit, and again, there will need further explanation here, but the asset limit is for household assets, $150,000 with the harding exempt. There's a little more to it than that. There's also income limits, and you have to have what's called unreimbursed medical expenses. In other words, not everyone can receive it if they just because they're diagnosed with some type of cognitive impairment. If they're not paying for significant home care, they're not going to receive any benefit. So some of the common questions that we look into when we talk about planning. I get if someone's their loved one's diagnosed with cognitive impairment, sometimes a child or a spouse come to me. Oh, sure, and I say, well, I'm told I need to transfer the home from parent to child. Maybe it makes sense, but let's look at the facts. There could be negative tax consequences to do so. So that's not always the proper way to plan. So, and there are many issues related. If you, unfortunately, you have a loved one going to a nursing home, and you're going to get this a stack of 100 documents regarding a nursing home admission agreement and a packet of documents and little stickies, sign here. And you typically, what you'll see in that packet is what's called a responsible party agreement in the nursing home admission packet. What does that mean? Well, it's a good question. I don't know what that means. You have to look at the document. But in many cases, it means that they want a child to guarantee the parent's bill if it's unpaid. And of course, no child or no family member should do so. They can sign as the agent under the power of attorney, but that's about it, and that's what I would limit it to. So Medicaid coverage for home and community-based care, I mentioned that earlier, very, very state-specific. If the goal is to stay at home and you have limited resources, really get to know what programs are available. And there are many misconceptions and many rules regarding Medicaid transfer rules as well. And it's important to really know what those rules are in your particular state. And so when we talk about quality long-term care, it's like buying real estate. To a certain extent, your care is only as good as someone being your advocate. Everyone needs an advocate. And that means location, location, location. You want a place that's convenient for loved ones to visit on a regular basis. And you want to research. There's some good facilities. There's many not so good facilities, and you want to learn what the rights of a resident and family are. And it's not just what the facility tells you those rights are. You want to know about what the visitation is, and it may not be what they tell you the visitation is or hours are. And you want to make unscheduled visits. And it's important to schedule those visits and shift them, because you want to keep the community on their toes. But it's important to investigate your options, and it's a good place to start. There's Medicare websites it's called Medicare Compare for nursing homes. But some of that's good information, some of it's not very good information. So it's important to understand what type of care what type of care your loved one needs. What assisted livings generally are newer communities. Nursing homes tend to be more hospital-like. The most important thing for your loved one is you need an advocate. And so especially after COVID-19 and the devastation that COVID-19 has brought. There's our info. I'll just wrap up because we have about 1 or 2 more minutes. Once again, that's my info. If you have any questions, feel free to email, or if you have a loved one in our area, feel free to call us. Otherwise, I can refer you to someone in your particular state. Being relatively active in our National Elder Law Association, I pretty much know an elder law in most states or most metropolitan areas throughout the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska. So if there's any way we can help you, I would be more than happy to. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. So with that, it's just about 4:50, and I think we're supposed to end. So I want to thank you all for your attention, and I hope you found the information provided valuable. And I really appreciate your interest on National Caregiver Day. So thank you for attending. Thank you for HFC for inviting me. And please do continue doing what you're doing. So have a great President's Weekend all. And I thank you for your attention, and have a great day and have a great weekend. I hope you and your loved ones stay safe, and thank you for doing what you do as well.